Jake Whitman pulled into Cedar Brook with a slow rumble, trailer in tow and an old mower strapped down like it held a secret. The tires of his faded blue pickup crunched over the familiar gravel of Pine Hill Lane, shaking loose 20 years of memory as the morning sun slanted across lawns cut with geometric precision. On both sides of the road, American flags hung at exactly the same angle, wind chimes moved in unison, and flower beds bloomed with HOA-approved colors. Soft pinks, deep reds, nothing neon. He eased to a stop in front of his father's old house, a red brick ranch that hadn't changed much, though time had softened its lines. The porch steps sagged slightly. The mailbox leaned forward like it was trying to listen, but the old oak out front, the one Carl Whitman planted the year Jake was born, was taller than ever, broad and defiant. Jake cut the engine, the silence folding around him like a coat. He sat still for a moment, eyes drifting toward the entrance sign a few lots back. Cedar Brook Homeowners Association, St. 1996. Paint cracked along the corners. Still, it stood proud, unyielding. "Still standing, huh?" Jake said under his breath, lips tugging into a wry smile. "Let's see for how long." Climbing out, he stretched his back, adjusted his denim jacket, and walked to the trailer. The mower was old, older than some of the residents around here, but it still ran with the same stubborn rhythm, just like Carl. Jake gave the bungee cords a tug, unfastened them, and lowered the machine to the driveway. His boots, broken in leather, darkened by decades, scuffed the pavement with each step. One by one, blinds parted along the street. Behind the gauze of pristine windows, eyes watched, not waving, not welcoming, measuring. He rode the mower into the garage for now and took a slow tour of the house. The interior smelled faintly of oil soap and pipe tobacco. Dust had gathered on the sills, but the bones of the place were strong, just like he remembered. The old couch, the coffee table with its one bum leg, the bookshelf where Carl had stuffed HOA newsletters he never read. Jake rested a hand on the back of his father's chair, thumb brushing over a worn patch in the fabric. Back outside, he carried a thermos labeled "Property of Carl Whitman" to the porch. He sat for a while on the top step, sipping coffee and listening to the birds. No music, no news, just wind and memory. Across the street, a figure in a wide-brimmed straw hat stepped off a porch and shuffled across the lawn. She held a covered tin in one hand, her gait steady, purposeful. Jake stood. "Lelena," he called. "Jake Whitman," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "You're a sight." They met at the sidewalk. Linda Carver, her silver hair pulled back in a bun, looked up at him with the quiet warmth of someone who didn't need to fill silence. She handed him the tin. "H cookies. Welcome back." "Thank you," he hesitated. "You remembered." "I never forget a Whitman, or a man who drives into HOA trap with a mower older than my Buick." Jake laughed, short and genuine. "I'm just here to cut grass." Linda glanced over her shoulder. "Hope you're not planning to repaint. Queen Carolyn still patrolling." Jake raised a brow. "Still?" "She never really left, just got louder." As Linda made her way back across the street, a figure emerged 2 houses down, pushing a bright red lawnmower in slow, careful rows. Young man, square jaw, eyes fixed on the line he was cutting. Wyatt Blake, Karen's son. The resemblance was subtle, jawline, posture, but it was there. Jake watched him a moment, then turned back toward the garage. He rolled the old mower to the edge of the lawn and yanked the cord. It roared to life on the second pull, vibrating like a restless dog. The smell of gasoline and fresh grass filled the air. He began to mow. It wasn't long before the blinds shifted again. One neighbor set down his rake and crossed his arms. Another pulled out a phone and started filming. A woman across the street leaned into her porch railing, whispering into her cell. Jake didn't acknowledge any of them. He kept his focus forward, following each line to completion, turning smoothly, methodically, like it was a dance he'd rehearsed for years. The sun rose higher. Sweat gathered under his collar, but he didn't stop. Halfway through the lawn, he paused for a sip from the thermos. He wiped his brow, then continued. When he reached the final row, he aligned the mower, rolled forward, and cut one last perfect stripe. That's when it came, sharp and unmistakable, slicing through the morning calm. "The mower's in violation." He looked up slowly, not surprised. She stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown. Carolyn Blake. Karen incarnate. Her floral print blouse flared in the breeze like a warning flag. Jake didn't respond. He clicked off the mower. And then came the second sound, the soft crunch of tires. A police cruiser slowed to a stop, window down. "Sir, we got a call." Karen Blake emerges like spring thunder, loud, floral, and convinced she's right. She stormed across the lawn as if the earth itself had offended her, heels biting into the edge of the Whitman property like little declarations of war. Her blouse, a vibrant mix of sunflowers and hibiscus, flapped dramatically in the breeze, though not a hair on her heavily sprayed head dared move. The matching clip-on earrings glittered in the sunlight, weaponized accessories of HOA authority. From her porch across the street, Linda watched over the rim of her lemonade glass. She didn't say a word, but the look on her face, half smirk, half resignation, was enough. Queen Caroline's still patrolling, indeed. Jake stood calmly by his mower, one hand resting on the handle like it was part of him. It already turned off the engine, the silence now only interrupted by birdsong and the far-off whine of another lawn mower in the next neighborhood over. His denim jacket was dusted with clippings, and a line of sweat had begun to form along the brim of his cap. Karen didn't stop until she was nearly toe-to-toe with him. She flared her nostrils, scanning the scene like a general surveying enemy territory. This is a direct violation of HOA Code 14, subsection B, Lawn Equipment Noise Regulation, she barked. No motorized mowing between 8 and 11 on weekdays exceeding 72 decibels. Jake gave her a polite nod. Good morning to you too, Caroline. It's Cayenne, she snapped. He let the correction hang in the air like an errant weed she'd missed. Several neighbors had suddenly found urgent reasons to be outdoors. One man pretended to sweep his already spotless driveway. A woman crouched by her mailbox, rearranging nothing. 2 kids abandoned their bikes and sat on the curb, not even bothering to hide their interest. Karen pointed dramatically at the mower, which sat idle and harmless. That thing sounds like a chainsaw in a closet. It's disturbing the peace. Jake didn't move. That's a 1974 Briggs & Stratton, original parts. It runs at 68 decibels when idle, 71 at peak under load. I checked this morning. Karen blinked. You expect me to believe you carry a sound meter? I don't need to. But your rulebook appendix C, decibel thresholds are advisory, not enforceable, unless measured by licensed ordnance officer, which you're not. Her jaw clicked. Then it's a safety hazard. That machine's a relic. Jake offered the barest hint of a smile. Still meets anti-blade guard standards, and your bylaws don't regulate equipment age. Karen took a step back, huffing. Don't get cute. Jake didn't reply. He simply sipped from his thermos. That's when the black and white cruiser rolled up. Officer Lester stepped out slowly, adjusting his belt. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with a sun-faded uniform and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen more dog disputes and fireworks complaints than serious crime. He glanced at Karen, then at Jake, then at the lawn. His gaze lingered on the mower. Sir, he said mildly, we got a call about aggressive landscaping. Karen thrust a manicured finger toward Jake. He's violating multiple HOA codes and creating an unsafe environment. That mower could take off someone's foot. Lester turned to Jake. Name, please. Jake Whitman, he replied, reaching into his back pocket for ID. Lester's eyebrows lifted slightly as he read the license. Whitman. Ah. Jake nodded. Moved back into my father's house. Cow's boy? The officer asked. That's right. Lester smirked and handed back the ID. Your dad used to bring us donuts from Miller's Diner. Best jelly-filled in the county. Jake nodded again, calm. They still make 'em. Karen looked between them, flustered. This is not a social call. Officer, I demand a citation. He's clearly flaunting regulations. Lester leaned on the edge of his cruiser door. Ma'am, unless there's property damage, injury, or active trespassing, this is a civil issue. She scoffed. It's noise. Violation. Intentional disregard. Jake shrugged. I've read the charter, cover to cover. Karen crossed her arms, scoffing. What are you, a lawyer? Something like that, he said, taking another drink from his thermos. There was a beat of silence. Lester looked toward the gathering spectators. You're all clear, he said to Jake with a chuckle. Keep your row straight. Karen's lips pinched tight, the color rising in her cheeks. She turned on her heel and marched off without another word, her purse bouncing against her hip with every furious step. Linda, still sipping lemonade, lifted her glass slightly in Jake's direction. Later that afternoon, Jake walked out to check the mail. The box creaked open with a sound like a sigh. Mixed in with some junk flyers and a coupon for windshield wipers was a heavy envelope on thick, cream-colored paper. Across the front, in precise script, Emergency Aqua Meeting, Attendance Mandatory. The clubhouse smelled like cheap lemon polish and tension. Jake stepped inside without a word, the rubber soles of his boots silent against the waxed floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, washing the room in a sterile white that made even the laminated flyers on the bulletin board look tired. Lining the walls were frames of community standards. A gallery of rules no one had voted for, but everyone had learned to fear. At the front of the room, a folding table was draped in an American flag tablecloth, slightly crooked. Karen Blake stood behind it like a queen returning to her throne. Her lips pressed into a polite, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. She clutched a clipboard against her chest, as though it were a gavel, her floral blouse bright enough to be seen from space. Her hair was as flawless as ever, sprayed into submission, not a strand out of place. Jake scanned the room. About 15 people dotted the chairs, most in the back rows, as if hoping proximity would shield them from drama. Linda Carver sat off to the right, her knitting needles clicking softly, rhythms steady. Wyatt Blake hovered near the wall, phone in hand, pointed discreetly toward the front. Mark, one of the more seasoned board members, leaned on his cane near the refreshment table, looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else. Jake took a seat near the back, arms folded, expression unreadable. Karen cleared her throat into the mic, which squawked in protest. Thank you all for attending this emergency session. As you've likely noticed, our community has recently encountered troubling behavior. A few heads turned toward Jake. He didn't react. We are experiencing a rise in mower noise, non-conforming lawn patterns, and frankly, moral decay. If we allow these violations to continue unchecked, we risk becoming just another unkempt street, another forgotten zip code. Linda's needles paused for a moment, then resumed. Curran lifted a printed document. I am proposing an immediate amendment to our code. Effective this week, fines will be issued for noise levels exceeding 70 decibels and for any hedges that do not meet visual uniformity. Mark raised a hand lazily. Didn't we table that motion last year? Karen didn't look at him. New times call for renewed order. Mark sighed and shook his head. It's spring, Carolyn. People mow. It's Karen, she snapped, then quickly softened her tone, and our standards are what separate Cedarbrook from surrounding developments. From the far side of the room, Wyatt leaned toward Linda and whispered, She doesn't know, does she? Willem, as in look up. Not yet. Karen was now passing out slips of paper. We'll conduct a silent show of hands vote, and any homeowner not present will be counted as abstaining. Let's be efficient. Jake remained still, eyes forward. A few residents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One woman fidgeted with a purse strap. Another coughed into her hand and muttered something about dinner getting cold. No one raised a hand. The silence deepened. Karen's fingers curled around her clipboard. Well then, she said with a forced laugh, looks like some of you have forgotten what it means to care about community. That was when Jake stood up. The movement was smooth, deliberate, every head turned, even the knitting stopped. I'd like to add an item to the agenda, he said calmly. Karen blinked. You're not a voting member. Jake reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. His boots thudded softly against the linoleum as he walked to the front table. He laid the folder down, gently, but with finality. Across the cover, in bold print, Arbitration Authority, Board President Whitman. The room froze. Jake unfolded the stamped letter slowly, the room leaning in as if gravity had shifted toward the truth. The manila folder crackled faintly under his fingers, and for a moment even the ceiling fan stopped squeaking, as if the whole building were holding its breath. Outside, the last hints of daylight had faded, casting the Cedarbrook HOA clubhouse in a pale hum of overhead fluorescence. The room, chilled by an air conditioner running just a little too hard, seemed frozen in place. Along one wall, a framed photo of Carolyn Blake, smiling, hands folded over a podium, dated 2020-202. Watched the scene like a relic from a different era. Jake didn't speak at first. He let the silence stretch, then turned the document to face the room. The embossed seal caught the light. This, he said in his low, steady voice, is the Transition Authority document. It was approved and signed by the interim HOA board 2 months ago. A faint rustle of movement from the second row. Mark adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. We voted, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Carolyn was out. You just didn't accept it. Karen blinked, but said nothing. Jake's tone remained calm, unwavering. The board invited me to return as interim president. I agreed on one condition, that I'd be given space to observe quietly, before acting. I didn't want to cause chaos. I wanted to fix it from within. Someone near the back shifted in their chair. Wyatt, sitting by the side wall, turned his camera slightly, capturing every angle. Linda, needles paused mid-stitch, watched with quiet intensity. Karen finally found her voice. "This is absurd, a forgery. I never saw any such document, and I certainly never stepped down." "No," Jake said, "you didn't. But that's not required under Article 7.2. He opened the folder again and pulled out a highlighted page, reading aloud. "If a sitting president refuses or fails to respond to official board correspondence after 3 documented attempts, the board may proceed with a vote to appoint a transition authority with a 2/3 quorum." He closed the folder gently, like sealing a verdict. "You ignored every Zoom invitation, every certified letter, and every email. That gave the board the authority to move forward." Karen's face had gone pale beneath her foundation. She turned to Mark. "You agree to this?" Mark nodded once. "We were tired, Carolyn. You weren't listening." "Karen," she hissed. Jake didn't flinch. "Effective tonight, all punitive fines issued under Carolyn Blake's term are hereby suspended for legal review." That did it. A wave of murmurs rose around the room. Some startled, some relieved. A couple of heads nodded quietly. A woman near the back actually whispered, "Thank God." Karen stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger. "You think this makes you right? That you can just rewrite everything we've built?" Jake held her gaze without blinking. "I think this gives us a chance to start again." She clenched her jaw. "You think this is over?" Jake looked her in the eye, voice level. "No, I think this is just beginning." Inside Jake's garage was a war room. Folders, file boxes, maps of Cedar Brook, and a corkboard full of pins and post-its. It smelled faintly of old motor oil and pine cleaner, the scent of time and quiet planning. Under the sloped wooden beams, a single work light cast a warm yellow glow, spotlighting a lifetime of preparation. Cardboard boxes were stacked in neat rows, each one labeled in Jake's handwriting: noise complaints, 2019, bylaw amendments, photographic evidence. The corkboard on the back wall bore a color-coded layout of the neighborhood with tiny red flags pinned on the homes most frequently fine. Jake stood over the table, leafing through a binder. Beside him, Linda Carver sat with a cup of tea balanced on one knee, thumbing through a stack of violation letters with her reading glasses perched low. "Unauthorized wreath color," she read aloud. "Non-regulation porch chair. Improper mailbox plant height. Lord have mercy." Jake gave a soft chuckle. "That last one was my dad's favorite. He got fined 4 times for planting daisies." "Carolyn hated daisies," Linda murmured, eyes scanning the page. "Apparently," Jake said. "But the funny thing is, the bylaws never mention plant height at all." From the doorway, Wyatt entered carrying a small flash drive between his fingers. "I found it," he said. "Took some digging, but Mom never deletes anything." Jake took the drive, nodded. "Thanks, Wyatt." They plugged it into the old laptop Jake kept on a rolling stool. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder marked HOA correspondence. Dozens of emails appeared, many flagged with urgent subject lines, others simply marked Karen's notes. Jake clicked one at random, an invoice from a spa and wellness retreat 2 towns over. "Paid with the HOA card," Wyatt confirmed. "Twice in 1 month." Linda whistled. "That'll look real fine next to the Community Beautification Fund," she claimed, "was short." Jake said nothing, already printing out the records. By noon, they had spread the evidence across the garage. Maps of reported violations, proof of inconsistent enforcement, even handwritten notes from residents who'd been too afraid to speak out. One folder held letters of apology from residents fined for hosting birthday parties in backyards deemed visually disruptive. 83%, Jake said, tapping a pie chart on a clipboard. That's how many homeowners received at least one unjustified fine in the last 2 years. Linda's face softened. "People deserve better." "That's the plan," he replied. That evening they gathered at the Dixie Diner, the only place in town where a grilled cheese still came with a dill pickle on the side. The back booth had been cleared for them. Jake, Linda, Mark, Wyatt, and 2 other longtime residents, Henry Foster, a retired mailman, and Joan Levy, a piano teacher with a cane carved by her late husband. The waitress poured refill after refill of black coffee while plates of soup and cherry pie were passed around. Wyatt sat quietly in the corner, a slice of pie half-eaten, just like he used to as a boy when his mom dragged him to these meetings, except this time he was here by choice. Jake placed a document in the center of the table. "I'm calling it the HOA Reform Act. It dissolves the current enforcement structure and replaces it with a Community Oversight Council. Open meetings, transparent votes, no more petty fines. Mark leaned in, nodding slowly. About damn time. Joan signed first, her pen steady despite the arthritis. Henry followed, muttering something about finally getting to plant tomatoes without permission. Linda scrawled her name with a decisive loop. Wyatt signed last. Jake signed his name at the bottom and dated it. April 19th. The room felt lighter somehow. Conversation turned easy. Laughter floated between bites of grilled cheese. Outside, dusk settled in, casting a golden tint over the diner windows. Jake lingered after the others had gone, talking with the waitress about her mom's health and the smell of fried onions that wouldn't leave his jacket. He took his coffee to go, nodded a good night, and drove home beneath a sky that was just beginning to show stars. His porch light flickered as he pulled into the driveway. Something bright caught his eye. Pinned to his front door with blue painter's tape was a red envelope. He stepped closer, peeling it free. Across the front in bold block letters, "Eviction notice, HOA grounds, immediate response required." The eviction notice was written in Karen's signature font, bold, italicized, and full of empty threats. Jake held it in both hands on the porch, the red envelope still crackling from where it had been taped to his door. The seal in the corner was familiar, an outdated HOA emblem edged with gold leaf and last used in 2021 before the design was updated. He turned the paper over, reading every line carefully. The language was dense, peppered with phrases like non-compliant resident activity, failure to conform to aesthetic code, and unauthorized mower storage. He didn't frown, he didn't scoff, he just folded it neatly, slid it into a plastic sleeve, and walked back inside. The next morning, the sun crept over Cedar Brook as Jake stepped outside in his usual boots and denim jacket. In one hand, he held a fresh photocopy of the eviction letter, in the other, a manila envelope thick with documentation. He crossed the lawn slowly, nodding at Mrs. Winters, who was pruning roses in her bathrobe. When he reached the HOA mailbox, once the fortress of Carolyn Blake's memos, he paused. He slid a copy of the eviction into the box marked Board Archive, then turned toward town. The sheriff's office was a squat building with a faded green roof and a dent in the parking sign from last year's Christmas parade. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old leather. Behind the desk sat Officer Lester, his sleeves rolled up, glasses low on his nose, studying a Sudoku. "Jake," Lester said, not looking up, "I figured I'd see you." Jake handed him the envelope without a word. Lester flipped it open, scanned the first page, and let out a long sigh. "She used the old seal," he muttered. "That hasn't been valid since before the pandemic." Jake nodded. "There's no current board authority under her name." Lester tilted his chair back. "She's hanging on by her fingernails." "I'm not pressing charges," Jake said. "I just want it recorded." Lester raised a brow. "You're being generous." Jake gave a one-shouldered shrug. "No use escalating things." At that moment, the door burst open with a screech. Karen marched in, hair stiff as ever, eyes burning. She didn't look at Lester. You think you can just smear me around town?" she shouted, pointing at Jake. "You've been harassing me, following me, undermining everything I've built." Jake didn't respond. He simply looked at Lester. Karen turned to the sheriff. "I demand a restraining order. He's weaponizing my private emails, spreading lies about spa charges, and now he's at my house filming." Lester stood slowly. "Ma'am," he said with that even tone only a small-town sheriff can master, "you issued an official-looking eviction using a seal that hasn't been legal in 2 years. I was enforcing standards." "You forged official authority," he said, now firmer. Karen's mouth opened and closed. Her arms trembled slightly. Lester stepped around the desk. "Next time, Carolyn, it won't be a warning." She blinked at him, then spun on her heel and stormed back out into the parking lot. Her car door slammed shut with a metallic thud. Jake exhaled through his nose. "Calm." Lester glanced over. "Still want to press charges?" "No," Jake said. "I'll handle her my way." That afternoon, Jake walked back home under a sky smeared with clouds. Before entering the house, he hammered a new wooden sign next to the porch steps. No solicitation. Underneath in smaller script, "Including but not limited to outdated authority." Inside he brewed coffee, watched the wind stir the trees, and settled into the quiet. At sunset the streetlights flickered on, and the town seemed to exhale, but inside one shadowed kitchen a single phone rang. Karen picked it up with a tight grip. "If he wants war," she hissed, "he'll get one." Across the hall, just out of sight, Wyatt stood in the dim glow of the hallway, arms crossed. Listening, he said nothing. The potluck was warm, the lemonade tart in the room held the kind of silence you only hear before a storm or a vote. Inside the Cedarbrook clubhouse, pastel streamers hung from the rafters, looped carefully around ceiling fans that turned on their lowest setting. Fold-out tables, covered in gingham and hand-sewn cloths, buckled slightly under the weight of deviled eggs, lemon bars, buttered rolls, and a glazed ham that had started to disappear even before Jake gave the signal to begin. Near the center of it all stood a wooden ballot box, smooth and sturdy, its hinges polished and corners sanded soft. Wyatt had made it from reclaimed oak. People stood in loose clusters, whispering. Neighbors who had barely spoken in years now shared sugar cookies and stories. Children crouched near a corner where hand-painted Easter eggs had been piled into a basket, though none dared touch them. It wasn't time to play yet. Jake stood near the front of the room, dressed in the same worn jacket he always wore. In his hands he held nothing, no clipboard, no speech. But he didn't need them. When he stepped onto the low riser and cleared his throat, every head turned. "Thank you for being here," he said, "and thank you for the pie, whoever made the peach." Laughter flickered across the room, tentative but real. I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Today, we don't vote for power, we vote for peace. No applause followed, just stillness. Mark nodded once from the second row. Linda pressed her hands over her knitting bag and whispered, "Amen." Jake stepped aside and gestured to the ballot box. One vote per household. No names, no pressure, just your voice. One by one, neighbors moved forward. Some carried slips folded tightly, others written in bold pen. Wyatt handed out extra paper without being asked. Joan Levy leaned on her cane as she approached, her fingers trembling slightly as she slid her vote into the slot. Henry Foster dropped his in with a nod and a low grunt. Jake didn't vote yet. He stood by the door, letting others go first. The quiet cracked when the door opened hard and fast. Karen Blake stepped in, a shade too late, her heels clacking against the tile. She wore cream slacks and a fitted blazer, and her eyes swept the room like a gust of cold air. "This is illegal," she snapped. "There was no notice, no formal petition. You're dismantling the very foundation of this community." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Linda looked up from her lap, not blinking. Jake didn't speak. He waited. Card stepped forward. "Jake Whitman has no authority to call this vote. He's erasing tradition, undoing decades of order and beauty. This isn't leadership, it's chaos." Wyatt stood. His voice was quiet at first. Karen froze. "Tradition doesn't mean fear," he said. "It doesn't mean fines for wind chimes or paint colors or what we plant in memory of someone we love." She stared at him. Her son. Her silence was louder than any protest. Linda rose next, her back straightened by memory. "My husband served in the Navy. When he passed, I hung a blue and white wreath on our door. Carolyn fined me twice and made me take it down, said it clashed with the seasonal color scheme." A wave of discomfort passed through the room. Jake finally stepped back toward the front. "Let's finish this." The last vote slid into the box. Wyatt sealed the lid. Mark stepped forward with the tally sheet and opened the box slowly, methodically. One by one he read them aloud. Not the names, just the choice. Yes, 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 again and again, like a heartbeat. When the final slip was unfolded, Mark looked up. "Unanimous." A murmur ran through the crowd. Surprise, relief, even laughter. Some clapped, others cried. Henry patted Jake's shoulder. Joan hugged Linda. Someone from the back called out, "To the future!" Jake stepped outside, alone, walking toward the wooden sign near the front gate. His fingers curled under the old metal plaque that read, HOA, meet Cedarbrook. With one firm tug, he pulled it from the post. From down the street, through a lace-curtained window, Karen watched him. A suitcase stood beside her. Her hand clutched a letter, the top corner visible beneath her fingers. Legal action denied. A new sign stood tall, made from old barnwood with gold lettering carved deep, "Welcome to Cedarbrook, where community comes first." It stood at the entrance just beyond the curve of Pine Hill Lane, where the old HOA sign once loomed like a silent sentry. The barnwood had come from Jake's father's shed, sanded and sealed, its grain still visible beneath the words. It didn't shine, it belonged. A month had passed since the vote. Spring had settled into the town like a favorite quilt. Soft, fragrant, familiar. Tulips bloomed without coordination. Daffodils leaned out of mismatched planters and American flags waved freely from porches where once only regulation banners had been allowed. Music drifted faintly from radios, blues, jazz even, a little country, and wind chimes clinked without worry of written warnings. Jake sat on his front porch with a mug of coffee and the Sunday paper folded across his lap. A pair of blue jays pecked at seed near the garden bed, which had exploded with color now that he no longer trimmed it to fit someone else's vision. Across the street, Linda Carver arranged paintbrushes on a folding table under a striped awning. A group of children sat cross-legged around her, already dabbing watercolors onto thick white paper. She wore a sun hat now, tilted at a jaunty angle, and her laugh carried clearly on the breeze. Down the road, Wyatt crouched next to the community sprinkler valve, wrench in hand. His T-shirt was stained with earth, and a small speaker beside him played something soft and familiar. Once the last nut was tightened, he rose, brushed his hands off, and glanced toward a nearby garden bed. He reached into a paper sack and pulled out a handful of tulip bulbs, yellow, his mother's favorite. Without a word, he knelt and planted them in front of her old house. Neighbors passed each other with nods and smiles. Mr. Bingham from Lot 7 had finally hung his windmill spinner, the one Karen made him take down years ago. Joan's porch now boasted a purple door, and no one blinked twice. Someone had started a gardening club that didn't require a committee vote or uniform pots. Jake strolled the neighborhood slowly, nodding to each passerby. He stopped at the new community bulletin board, just a cork slab on a repainted barn door. A flyer for a neighborhood barbecue was tacked beside a handwritten note offering free tomato starters, take one, leave one, no fines, no forms. Later that afternoon, Jake set a tray of mugs and cinnamon waffles out on the porch railing. A little hand-painted sign hung from a nail beside the steps. Sunday morning coffee, all welcome. Folding chairs lined the walk. Neighbors drifted over in twos and threes, bringing banana bread, orange marmalade, lemon squares still warm from the oven. Jake poured coffee, passed napkins, and listened. One man recalled the year he moved in, how the HOA told him his porch bench was too rustic. A woman shared how she'd stopped decorating for holidays because she was tired of citations. Laughter replaced bitterness as stories unraveled into the air like ribbons. Kids chalked hopscotch squares on the pavement, and someone tuned a guitar. Near the end of the morning, Jake stepped inside and returned with a small wooden plaque. Worn, familiar. He mounted it beside the front door, just below the mailbox. Carl Whitman 193922021. Porch open, coffee always hot. He stepped back and looked at it for a long moment. As the gathering wound down and neighbors returned to their homes, Jake sat once more with his mug. The paper had fallen open on his lap to the local news section. There, just below the fold, was a black and white photo of the new entrance sign and a headline in clean block letters, "The man who freed Cedar Brook with a lawnmower." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Then, as the wind shifted, an envelope slipped beneath the screen door. He bent to pick it up, no return address. Inside was a folded note, written in Wyatt's careful hand. "Thanks for showing me what leadership looks like." Jake smiled and poured a fresh cup of coffee. In the quiet that followed Karen's departure, Cedar Brook found something far more valuable than a new set of rules. It found its voice. What began with a lawnmower and a silent stand turned into a gentle uprising of neighbors reclaiming their dignity, one flowerpot and porch swing at a time. When power is wielded without compassion, it crumbles under the weight of its own noise, but when a community rises with kindness and resolve, even the loudest rules fall quiet. Maybe it's not about fighting fire with fire, but about planting something better in its place. Like a well-tended garden, freedom grows strongest where it's shared.